Thank you very much. I'm going to be talking a little bit here about the human side of things, right? If you were here for Roger's talk earlier, we're both with No before, but we deal with different things. He took the technical side here. I'm going to talk about the human side. This is a part that absolutely fascinates me when it comes to scams, when it comes to what the folks are doing these days in phishing attacks, vishing attacks, everything, basically. And there's a lot more science behind it than a lot of people understand, right? Phishing attacks, these kinds of things, most of these come out from scams that were pre-internet days, right? Y'all know the Nigerian prince scam, right? That guy's been trying to give away money for eons, okay? But the deal is that started out before email. They used to actually have to lick stamps and put them on envelopes and mail those to people. Well, now what's happened is these things have gotten to the point that it's all electronic, right? So the cost is almost nothing. On the dark web right now, I can send about 50,000 phishing emails through a service for about $60. That's nothing, you know, compared to what they were doing before. And so if you're, you know, if you get a small percentage of that in these things, it can be very beneficial and lucrative. Now, I'm going to warn you, if we have any of the college kids in here today, this is not a talk on how to make a lot of money scamming people, okay? I highly frown on that, especially because you're here in the US. If we were in Ukraine, it might be a different talk. But they've gotten pretty good at busting people here. And I'm also saying that because the NSA is across the hall and probably listening to this right now. So anyways, as we get started here, a little bit of background. I'm a security guy, been in security, gosh, I got into IT and security back in the 1990s, so I'll show my age a little bit here. I've worked in healthcare, I've worked in manufacturing. I spent about 10 years as a contractor and ended up the security manager for, get ready for it folks, the 2nd Regional Cyber Center Western Hemisphere, which is a fantastically fun name for an organization, but really stinks when you have to answer the phone like that every time. But basically, we were the place, I helped roll out the Active Directory for all of North America for all of the Army post camps and stations. We did the network for all of North America, a lot of the network defense pieces and stuff like that. So I was a security manager there. I worked there about 10 years. What I saw happen in those places is pretty wild. The attacks that happened in those places were constant, but the ones that were always most successful were ones that focused on people. All right, who remembers back in the day there was the I love you virus and Melissa and all that kind of good stuff, right? The first time I ever got hit by a virus, I was working in a 130,000 square foot machine shop. We did aerospace machine stuff, right? And I remember we used to have these Barbie laptops, we called them. It was a two-way pager, and it was the pinnacle of technology at the time, right? You flip these things open, it had a little QWERTY keyboard in it, okay? I was in a hallway meeting with the bosses, the president and those sort of folks, and we were standing around chatting about something, and all of our pagers went off at the same time. And I flipped it open, and I saw the message that came across, and I was like, oh crap. So I made a beeline to the server room, unplugged the Exchange server, things were already queuing up on there. It took me about 26 hours to rebuild everything and fix everything, okay? And at the time I thought, wow, that sucks. You know, I was like, how much worse can this get? And I look back at that now and I gotta laugh because that was more of a mild inconvenience compared to what they're doing these days with these same sorts of attacks. And it's been phishing since back then. But what's happening now is taking out companies, and I mean taking them out hard. Ransomware, obviously, if you haven't been following ransomware, we thought it was going to slow down for a little bit there, and then no, it didn't. Right? So we're seeing manufacturing get hit by this. Cities, states, and municipalities are just getting crushed by the ransomware problem. So we'll talk about a little bit of that. But most of this stuff, most of the bad things that happen these days are happening through some form of social engineering. Now, social engineering is an interesting thing because social engineering is not, by definition, a bad thing. Social engineering is really kind of how we deal with people in our everyday lives, right? It's how we deal with our bosses, our coworkers. If you have kids, God bless you, and it's how we deal with them. It's how we do all of that. But it's not always bad. The problem is the bad guys have weaponized it. And that's what we're going to talk about here, is how you weaponize this sort of thing. And I'll give you a quick example. Where we work at KnowBe4, we have fingerprint scanners to get us in the doors, okay? And our policy reads that if you know the person, not everybody has to fingerprint in, right? We will allow tailgating for people that if you know them. Now, I'm a pretty public figure in the organization because of all the talks and stuff I do in the webinars, so people tend to know me. Now, one thing about me is my fingerprint is horrible. So I know that if I go up and I hit the fingerprint reader, I'm going to be there for a while trying to do the fingerprint yoga, right? But what I found is, when I get into the elevator, if I step to the back of the elevator and people get in front of me, they're going to be the first to exit. They're going to be the first to the reader. They're going to badge in. We all go in, and everybody's happy. It's not a malicious thing. It actually makes it more efficient because we're not all waiting for me to get my finger to read, okay? That's a social engineering ploy, but it's not malicious. Now, you take those same sorts of things and weaponize them, do things like a lot of buildings have two sets of doors, an outer and an inner. The outer is generally open. The inner is where the badge readers are. So if I pretend and I have a badge that looks like it's going to be legitimate, if I can time it so that I let the person in the first door and then show them my badge, they're more likely to go badge into the second door because they're reciprocating for me opening the first door for them. And that's how I can get into a building without a valid badge. That's a human nature thing. That's weaponizing. So we're going to talk about some of those techniques and things like that, the psychology behind it. So again, I'm with KnowBe4. We're over here right out of Clearwater. Got a beautiful view from downtown Clearwater onto Clearwater Beach. Can't argue that. About 28,000 customers strong. Now I started in 2016, I think. I was in the employee 130 range. We're up to 850 now. So the growth has been fantastic. Why has that been fantastic? Well, organizations are finding that focusing on the human side is becoming more and more important. And so our growth has just been crazy. So moving on, what's a cyber conference without a Sun Tzu slide? We've all seen these before, but this quote is real. You know, all warfare is based on deception. Sun Tzu, if you don't know him, he's a pretty recent author. It's interesting with him, with this, because some people in the industry, they don't like this quote or this phrase because it talks about warfare. And they think, oh, well, that's just FUD, or fear, uncertainty, and doubt. But here's the thing. If you think about it, it is warfare. It is serious, right? We're seeing billions of dollars being lost. We're seeing companies get folded. And the other thing is these attacks that happen are happening constant. Now, how many of you in the room have one of these little beasties, right? You probably get your email on it, right? If you're anything like me, the last thing you do before you go to bed is you plug that thing into the charger in your bedstand is check your emails, check your messages. The first thing you do when you wake up, I know it's me, put on my glasses, I'm bleary-eyed, and I'm looking at messages, okay? We are attached to these things constantly. And now, instead of being attacked only when we sit down in front of the computer, it's a constant thing. It's going on all the time, all day long. Anyone that's checking their email is getting attacked all the time. The other thing is, the bad guys that are doing these attacks, these aren't the kids in their mom's basement drinking Mountain Dew, eating pizza. These are very, very organized group. This is organized crime, honestly. This is nation states. We see that. North Korea, China, Russia. Those are pretty serious things right there, okay? A lot of this stuff, it's even being done by terrorist organizations who take the funds that they get through these sorts of attacks and use them to fund kinetic attacks, which is terrifying. It is more serious than it has ever been before. It is more organized, and they are more skilled than they have ever been before, which really stinks for us because we haven't been able to get our arms around this in 10 years, 20 years that I've been doing it, and we're still fighting that. But I am happy to say that we are starting to take things a lot more seriously as we start moving from a focus being on making sure that we check a box to actually doing the user part as part of a security plan. When we move from compliance to actually creating it as a security thing, we're making huge, huge steps in this. And we're getting much, much better now. So moving on, it's also important to understand when it comes to deception, you never really know what's going on the internet, right? Now I can tell this guy's a hacker because he's wearing a hoodie. Otherwise, you may not know. But really, you know, it's become easier to become anonymous on the internet. All right, there's a lot of things out there that allow for anonymity and things like that, but we don't always know what's going on the other side of that, and that's part of the problem here. People spoof other people all the time. They play games. We see some pretty interesting ways to craft, for example, phishing emails and domains where they do things like puny code attacks. And that is where they'll register a domain in another language, and some browsers automatically translate those over to English. So there will be like ASCII codes basically in the domain name, and then in your browser it shows up and looks like Microsoft. Okay, this is some pretty serious stuff right there. They're taking extra steps to do that. And it's been, you know, it's been growing exponentially, the tricks. If you heard Roger's talk earlier talking about the way they're getting around MFA, there's some pretty scary techniques going on around there. Well, the deception techniques are also getting just as good. So first thing I want to talk about here, though, is some of the numbers. And I do this because I think a lot of people underestimate how bad phishing is these days, but it's a pretty significant thing. For example, 91% of successful malicious data breaches are tied back to a spear phishing attack. The number, I think, can even be higher than that, quite frankly. But whether they're actually doing the attack through the phishing or whether they're gaining initial information to go to the attack, phishing is where these attacks are starting from. Now, ransomware, again, we're talking billions of dollars in ransomware. Spear phishing emails used by a lot of attack groups. In March of 2018, 1 in 484 emails to organizations on the mid-size had malware. That's huge. If you think about the sheer number of emails that come in, that's a huge number, right? When it comes to ransomware, average cost is about $133,000. That's an average cost. We obviously see much, much higher. But ransomware, this is an interesting stat. 75% of companies infected with ransomware were running up-to-date endpoint protection. Some of these stats are coming from endpoint protection makers. 75%. So if you just go, well, I've got good endpoint protection, I got good antivirus, it's not going to stop ransomware, unfortunately. It's nice to have. We have to have layers out there, but you can't rely on it, unfortunately. And here's a scary one. 34% of businesses hit with malware took a week or more to regain access to their data. And that malware is ransomware. Now, what I find is interesting is when I talk to people, like I did a talk in Lubbock, Texas, not too long ago, and a lot of the people in attendance were from small companies. And I hear them go, we're too small. Nobody knows about us. They don't care about us. They don't care about our data. You know, nobody's going to try to hack us. What are they going to get, our contact list? But I have to remind them that the idea behind ransomware isn't taking money away or taking data that's valuable to them. It's holding on to data that's valuable to you. And that's the big difference in ransomware. You can't function when all of your stuff is down, right? And we see this over and over again. Look at what happens when the big cities get hit by this stuff, right? Water, power, all that stuff gets where they can't even pay their bills, right? We saw, I think it was Baltimore, took out their offices. People couldn't get marriage licenses. I mean, it affects a lot of things, and that's why the value of ransomware is so high, because they're getting your stuff, and that's why it applies to so many organizations, big or small. Doesn't really matter if you don't have your customer list, you're not doing much that day. So business email compromise. So CEO fraud, business email compromise. This is some of the stuff we're going to talk about here. This is a lot of the fraud stuff. Wire transfer fraud, things like that, growing like crazy. So it's been in every US state, 177 countries at least. This is the latest PSA from them. Over $26 billion between October 2013 and 2019. It's been incredible. And the tactics that they're doing in the business email compromise these days is very interesting, to say the least. So we'll talk a little bit about that. But first, we're going to get into a couple of things here. We're going to talk about the perception versus reality dilemma, focus redirection, psychology, and how we can defend ourselves. So let's start with this. Our brains are amazing, amazing things. But our brains apply filters, and this is the root of deception. If you can mess with the filters of your brain, you can actually make some very interesting things happen. So let me ask you a little bit here. When it comes to your brain, we rely on things that we can smell, hear, touch, taste, and we figure that those are reality. But there's a couple of things that happen. First of all, if you're looking at me right now, how many of you see your nose? Right? Unless you're looking at your nose, you don't see your nose. Why? Because your brain filters out that part of your vision. It is amazing how your brain does that. Now, if you want to see your nose and you look at your nose, you can see your nose. But otherwise, it actually filters that out automatically, which is a pretty amazing thing if you think about it. There's a lot of other things that will filter out too. If you get a chance, look up a show called Brain Games. And they talk about a lot of amazing things that our brains do. Things that we don't even realize. Like, we think that we have all this great peripheral vision, but it is a very small amount of vision that we actually have very clear straight in front of us. What we see going on around us, our brain kind of pieces together, but it's very easy to trick things on the outside. It's a fantastic show if you want to get into those sorts of things. Well, when it comes to presenting reality, where does this come into play? Well, things like this from the CIA Manual of Trickery and Deception, right? That's hard not to say with a voice like that. This is basically an idea of your brain when you're looking through a room. Imagine you're somebody who's doing CIA stuff or something, right? And you're in a room, you're looking around, you see this guy over here on the right. He looks like he's been hit by a truck. He's looking pretty rough, looking tired, had a bad day. Your brain does not perceive that person as a threat. Your brain is going to look at the person who's paying attention over here, who's looking lucid and aware as a threat. They may be able to overhear you, but your brain automatically filters out the other guy over here. This is just one different kind of way that this sort of thing happens. Now, little side note here, this is going to be the death of all of us in a zombie apocalypse, because the real threat is the guy that looks like that in the zombie apocalypse, right? This will be the end. But the other thing that happens is, when it comes to this perception thing or these filter things, is fun stuff like this. Who remembers what color the dress was? Blue and white, or blue and black, or white and gold? Two people sitting at the same monitor in the same lighting conditions can look at the same picture and see two very different things. There are some physical characteristics that come into play there. Okay? My wife and I sat there and looked at the same monitor and argued about this. Because she's not in the room, I'll say I was right. But the thing is, even once you've seen it kind of like this, broken apart, if you go back to that original picture, it is very hard not to see the one that you originally saw. Why? Because your brain has filtered out other things. It has decided what is real, and it will continue to show you that. It's like that Yanni versus Laurel audio file. Both sounds were in that audio file. Now, there's some physical characteristics in your hearing that make a difference, whether or not, but even hearing it separated out, when you hear them together again, your brain filters the other one out. Very, very powerful thing. And I'm going to show my age here on one more example. How many of you remember those the posters back in the 90s that had all the 3D things? And if you look at them cross-eyed long enough, like a whale pops out eventually, right? Well, once you've seen that whale, you can't unsee the whale. Your brain has found that, and it now filters out the other stuff. It's very hard sometimes. It was really hard for me to see it in the first place, but once I did, you can't shake it anymore. Our brains are powerful things. But what if we get in there and we mess around with some of that? What if we mess with the filters? Well, that's what the bad guys do. And they do it a lot of times through emotions. Emotions are an incredibly powerful way to get you to completely forget about rational thought, right? We've all been there. We've all felt that. But it's how they do this sort of thing. Now, when it comes to focus redirection, this is another piece of it here. that I want to bring to light. Now, I'm going to do a card trick here. How many of you have seen a card trick done in PowerPoint before? It's an amazing thing. Watch this, folks. I'm going to blow your minds here, okay? You ready? Pick a card, pick any of those cards. I'm going to make your card disappear. Everyone should have their card fixed right now, and I'll tell you, the magic in this is the transition. It's the PowerPoint transition that makes this all work. Is your card gone? Yeah, absolutely, right? Your card is gone. Well, how did we do that? Well, basically, we start off with this group of cards, and we end with that group of cards. They're completely different, okay? But by pushing people into focusing on a card we're going to remove, they're not memorizing the other cards around that. And by replacing them with something that's similar, if you look at the color patterns here are similar, people don't notice. Now, if this second group of cards down here were 2 through 10s, you know immediately what happened, right? But by getting you to focus on the card we're taking away and not all of the others, and doing a few little tricks like that, it makes it very hard for people to spot what just happened. Now, how many of you have seen that one before? Roger, you don't count. Okay, a couple of hands here. But it's kind of mind-blowing until you figure it out, right? But now that you know how it's done, if you see something similar, you're going to understand how that's done as well, right? That's kind of the key to this, is understanding how that works. Well, where does this come into play in the real world? Well, I'm going to take you back to the manual of CIA, or the CIA Manual of Trickery and Deception. Let's say you want to put something in somebody's drink. A great way to do that is to take a large ball of fire and stuff it in their face, okay? I was a smoker. I know how it is. When somebody's holding that lighter in front of your face, where is your eyes? Your eyes are on the ball of fire that's going to burn off your eyebrows if you're not careful, okay? In the meantime, they could basically wipe the table underneath you and replace it with everything else. But this is another ploy of focus redirection. If we can get you thinking about one thing or concentrating on one thing, lots of other stuff can happen over on the other side. Again, another psychological ploy. Well, we do this mentally sometimes, again, through emotional distress, through messing with your head, through emotions. We are amazing machines, humans are, but we also have emotions, and emotions trigger dopamine release and all kinds of crazy stuff that goes on that really messes with our heads. And it's just something that happens with us. That's an unfortunate thing. So the psychology applied to phishing, first we're going to talk about the social engineering piece and what it means. Well, how many of you have seen this show? Got some hands in here. If you haven't seen it before, this is Mr. Robot. They just started, I think, the last series, the fourth season of it, going to be the last one. I kind of think it jumped the shark after the second, honestly. But the cool thing about this show is, unlike CSI Cyber or other fantastically done shows like that was sarcasm, folks, this uses real exploits, real attack vectors, real tools, okay? This is not the guy comes into the office and, throws up his hoodie, because that's what you got to do first, and bangs around on the keyboard for like 30 seconds and then says, "I'm through the firewall," or "I'm in," right? Those classic hacker types of things. This is real stuff. Well, one of the things that they use in here pretty extensively is social engineering. And I love this quote by Elliot Alderson. "I've never found it hard to hack most people. If you listen to them, watch them, their vulnerabilities are like a neon sign screwed into their heads." That is an amazingly appropriate quote. How many of you have heard of DEF CON? All right, cool. So at DEF CON, they have the social engineering village and the social engineering capture the flag. And basically what that is they pick people, they put them up on a stage in a soundproof booth that has microphones inside. You got about 400 people out in the audience. And in this soundproof booth, because they have the microphones, you can hear what's going on, they start calling companies. And they get points for information that they're able to get from these companies over phone calls. And what they're doing is they're exploiting the humans on the other side. Now, it's interesting. A couple of years ago, one of the things that they did was it was transportation. That was the theme. And it was truck stops. The one person was doing truck stops. And they basically called another truck stop and said, "Hey, this is so-and-so from this other terminal. I got to tell you, man, we're having a hard time right now. Our internet is down. Our drivers are getting pissed off. They can't get on the internet. They're angry, blah, 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 blah," right? And so what this does is it triggers the other person who has probably either been in a situation like that or can think about how that situation would be to want to help this person out, right? So immediately they're going, oh yeah, no, our internet's good, we're good here. So then they go, okay, well, we're not sure what's going on. We think, I don't know, maybe it was an antivirus update that broke it or something. If you go down by the clock, do you have the yellow shield thing for antivirus? Oh, it says semantic antivirus. Ding, they get points for that, right? If I'm a bad guy and I know what antivirus you're using, I know what I'm going to do to try to get around it. So then it's like, well, I don't know, maybe it's one of the Microsoft patches. Did you guys install a patch? I know if you go here, you can look at the patches. Like where are you with the patches? Okay, so you have this applied or you don't, right? And they continue to get information. Well, we're using these Dell Optiplexes. You know, there's just a ton of things that you can get out of that. I've seen them find out whether the cleaning crew has to badge in and out the doors just by talking to these people. And that's a fascinating amount of information. And what do? They exploit the vulnerability of the person on the other end of the phone, who in this case wants to be helpful. We all have vulnerabilities. It's in how we deal with people who get aggressive towards us. Some people back away from aggression. Some people push back on aggression, right? How many people think that confidence can be a vulnerability, right? Absolutely. If you're a very confident person and I can get you convinced of something, you will fight to the death about that because you are confident in your answer. But if I can tweak how you came to that conclusion, that's a vulnerability for you, okay? So this is what's important. It's easy to find this out by talking to people, by watching people. I travel all the time. I travel a lot. And I spend time in the airports, which is the petri dish of humanity. Frankly, okay, there is some stuff that goes on in the airport that you just want nothing to deal with, right? But you get to see people interacting with other people in sometimes very stressful situations. And to me, that's fascinating to see how people handle these types of stressful situations, right? We see this all the time. This is, again, coming back to the humanity and vulnerabilities that we have with that. You start to learn how you can figure out how people will react to things and then how you can exploit it. Just like any other vulnerability in a security control or an operating system, we all have vulnerabilities that can be exploited. So this is an example of one of the ways that they did this. We saw this last year. We still see them all the time. This example, this is a real email that went out. And what happened here is the bad guys, they researched a college, and we saw this hit a number of schools. This was around the times that there were a number of school shootings last year. So tensions were already very high. So they figured out who the email provider was for this, which in this case was Microsoft, and they sent out this email, and it says, "Hello all, an emergency scare reported earlier on campus. Kindly go through the memo released and please follow outlined protocol." Okay? So the idea behind this is to get people riled up. They're already on edge about school shootings. They see this stuff going on. The emotions kick in. They click on this thing to go see this menu or this memo because they're like, man, I can't believe this happened here. And then they don't look at the URL bar because they're spun up. So what do? They put in their username, their password, bam, they got their credentials. What can happen when you're in an email and have their credentials? All kinds of nasty stuff, right? That's the last thing you want to do is give up your email credentials to people and let them actually get in your account, the hub of resetting every other password that you probably have, right? That's just one way that you do that. But this was designed to get people upset and get them riled up with the emotions so they don't look at the URL bar. And then they steal their credentials like that. It's amazingly effective. We saw this in a number of different variants. They continue to use things like this whenever something very controversial happens. This is one of the ploys that they're going to end up using. Business email compromise, we mentioned that before. Now the thing about business email compromise is it's incredibly effective. We see these huge losses, and it can be very tough for technology to spot. So a lot of times there's no payload, right? Technology looks for links. Technology looks for attachments. It looks for things like that. A lot of times there's no payload. This is simply getting a person to do something. Give up money, give up information, give up data. That's done from there. They generally tend to be personalized. Now, they're also tend to be low volume. I see this changing in the future as we begin to automate more and more and more. I can't speak at a cyber conference without saying AI. So using AI or things like that to be able to deal with the massive amounts of data, which is one of the things that AI is actually really good at, and being able to build some of these profiles on people much faster so you can have better phishing attacks much more quickly with less labor, okay? I see that happening because I think it's going to bring up the volume a little bit more, but either way, it's very targeted and personalized. You don't see the spam or phishing tells, the grammar and things like that. That just generally doesn't happen in these. And how, if you didn't know, on the dark web, because I also had to say that word, if you're playing bingo with me, please play along. You know, it's doing pretty well here, I think. I'm getting all the buzzwords. But on the dark web, there's actually services where you can take the email that you're going to send out, you submit it to them, they will fix your grammar, they will fix your spelling, and they guarantee increased click rates based on the services they provide. That's the markets that are going on around phishing because it's prolific, right? So we can't rely on those sorts of things in this type of email. The scammers have gotten very, very good. And I want to show you this great example right here. I think y'all are going to love this. Some scammers are very skillful. That guy, not one of them. So we're going to watch that again just in case you missed it and because I love this, right? Boom. So, again, this is not one of the skillful ones, but it is entertaining to see. It's funny in some of these other countries, you see things like this. I saw one recently, these guys on a scooter basically pulled out in front of a car, then backed it up and like hit the bumper and fell over and like, oh my gosh, and the lady gets out and she points to the camera on the dash and they take off, right? Scammers are going to be trying stuff all over the place. They're going to try all kinds of different venues. The problem is the really good ones seem to be doing stuff in email. So what are they targeting these days? Well, one of the things they're going after, or one of the ways that they do this, is gift card scams. So these are pretty hot and heavy these days. These are real ones that I get from a sharing group. I'm on a Slack channel that they share real stuff like this a lot. And so this one, I need you to make a purchase of iTunes gift cards this morning. It's a gift for a vendor. Are you available to make the purchase now? Okay? These are incredibly popular, and they're working very, very well. One of the angles that I've seen on this is it's an executive that's saying something like, hey, we're giving gift cards to all the top, or like the top 10% of employees, so I need you to go get, 10 gift cards or something like that. And by the way, you're a great employee too, so get one and keep it yourself, right? That's playing on the emotion there. You've got an executive, the person doesn't want to upset the executive, so they're going to do what they say. They want to feel like they're helping out, and then they end up sending the gift card information to the scammer pretty quickly like that. And funny story here, not too long ago this year, we at KnowBe4 were sponsoring it was a USB drop with a college where people were doing some USB drives all around this college, right? And one morning, I get an email from my boss that says, hey, Eric, I need you to go down and buy like 25 Starbucks gift cards. We're going to give them out to the people that help do the USB drops. And I'm like, yeah, right. And the email's like, yeah, I'm about to get on a plane, blah, blah. All the things are there, right? It's like you can't contact me. So I basically replied, and I'm like, yeah, not happening, not doing it until I hear from you, but thanks. So she landed, and it was legit. And I was like, do you realize that what you just sent me was the script for like 2/3 of the gift card scams out there? And then I went and got the gift cards. But I got to tell you, it opened my eyes to why these actually can work. Sometimes we look at these things and we go, you'd have to be an idiot to fall for this. But here's the deal, in the real world, they do it because it works and because people are falling for it. And there's reasons that people fall for it because sometimes these align with the real world. And that's what makes them so powerful. So yeah, that was kind of embarrassing though. It was pretty funny. So another one, payroll redirection. Have any of you heard of this one before? This is getting more and more popular, right? So The email comes in, it says, I'd like to change my EFT, direct deposit info, can it be effective for the current date? Old account is closed, blah, 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 blah. A lot of times this will be an executive sending it to someone in payroll. And no one in payroll wants to say, sir or ma'am, go out on the portal and do it yourself like the rest of us schleps, right? They're going to help the executive do this sort of thing. There's sometimes a good story behind it and why, et cetera, et cetera. Next thing you know, they end up changing the where the direct deposit goes. So true story, also from another talk I did earlier this year. This was kind of funny because it was at a college, and I wasn't even talking to the college was hosting it. And afterwards, one of the people from the college came up and said, yeah, so about that one that you were talking about, it got about 20 of our people this year at the same time on the check that they got their annual bonus, because it was a for-profit one. And I was like, you've got to be kidding me. Hey boss, I lost my video here. Anyways, I'll keep talking. He's a pro. But what had happened was basically the same thing. Is they had figured out, because it was a for-profit college, there was some profit sharing that happened. And they'd figured out that this is about when that happens. And they started hitting the HR department or payroll department with this and had a bunch of these things redirected. Well, you know, personally in my mind, I'm going, if you saw several people coming to you at the same time with the same issue, you should probably raise some flags, right? And rather than have a policy where they went and they took care of it themselves, where they would have to log into the platform or do something like that, thank you. Oh, well, thanks for nothing. Instead of being able to do that, well, you know, they just took care of it. Well, it cost them a lot of money. They were out a lot of money, and I was very surprised by that it happened on such a scale. A similar one to this that they're doing is, instead of just going after the money, it'll be an executive that sends an email to somebody and says, I need you to send me my last 3 paycheck stubs. Like maybe I'm at a cyber conference and a boat show broke out, and I'm going to go buy a boat now, right? Well, what can you do with 3 paycheck stubs? Well, you can do all kinds of good stuff. Well, it gives you your salary, it gives you all kinds of information on that. And the people, rather than want to push back again on the executives, will end up, let's see, I'm going to have to reset this, I think, folks. They'll end up doing it for that executive. Well, now the bad guys have all this information. So another way to do that, it's this very similar type of scam and attack. Most of these things, though, use the authority of the leadership to do what they're trying to do. And that's a powerful thing. If you're in leadership, if you're an executive, know that your authority can be abused to get people to do stuff like this. Tech support scams. Roger talked about this a little bit. You know, how many of us have not heard of this one or had a family member that's like, oh my gosh, Microsoft called me and I have a virus and they're here to help, right? So Roger worked for Microsoft. I was also frontline support for Windows 95, and I will tell you, it may sound harsh, I don't care, right? If you have a virus, I'm not going to go chase you down for it. It just doesn't happen. But I know this, but would my kids know this? Would my wife know this? Would my mother-in-law know this, right? These are fascinating. What gets me is I've seen these guys be so convincing that they'll use this in an organization that has an IT team and get into the computers instead of calling the IT guys. So like, oh, I don't want to bother the IT guys. Awesome, thanks for doing that. Or maybe they were at a website they probably shouldn't have been at work when something like this comes up and they don't want to rat themselves out. It's the same reason people have paid out of pocket for the smaller $200, $300, $500 ransomware infections on machines in organizations, because they don't want to get in trouble for something that they may or may not have done wrong, broken policy on. It actually works though. How's this wire transfer fraud? So bottom up, starts off with a simple email. Are you in the office? How many of you would spot that as an attack? Right, okay. If you've seen it, then you know it, right? Are you in the office? Well, these run the gamut of different things. This is, I need a payment processed. There's also ones I've seen that are, did you get my previous message? And it's usually an executive to financial controller, something like that. The person looks through their emails, they see nothing from the CEO, they fire back, they say, sir or ma'am, I'm sorry, I don't see an email from you. And the response the bad guys give to that is very emotional. It's oftentimes something like, I can't believe you screwed this up. I sent you something earlier. I asked you to wire some money to some things because we're acquiring a company or we're doing something, right? There's always a pretext to it. But we're doing this thing. I'm going to have to go back in and fix this because you messed it up. While I'm in there, you better get this money transferred. Bam. This just went from, hey, did you get my previous message, to something incredibly scary and high pressure. This is how they work. In some organizations, the CEO is a bad person or is somebody to be feared, right? And some they aren't. But these would work very, very well because they're lashing that authority out at this person. Okay? And we see tricky ways of trying to hide these things. This looks like it comes from DCU Bank, whatever. What they've done here is, if you see something like this, the bad guys love to take WordPress blogs especially, which end up being unsecured. People spin up a blog and they don't look at it for 2 years anymore, and it just runs in the background on one of those free services, right? Well, they'll get in there and they'll bury it deep within there, some of their stuff, so that it's really hard to see, really hard for the people to spot, and they'll use this to host some of the stuff like Roger talked about, where it's grabbing your credentials, where it's doing stuff like that. So if people look and you see things in blogs, this is one of the ways that they do that. Another thing that they do is, a lot of times email gateways and things like that are designed to look for keywords or phrases. So what do? Instead of actually giving you the words or phrases, they give you an image. And the image says everything, and the whole image is a hyperlink. So now the gateways that are designed to read the text in the message don't see these sorts of things. It's a pretty tricky way of doing it if you think about it. So these are a couple of the things that they do to try to do that. This is one of my favorite things, is ads called clickbait. We've all seen these ads. You go to any news site these days and it's full of these ads, right? Why is it full of these ads? Because they work. They make people want to see things. This one here, you won't believe what they caught the cashiers doing at the supermarket. Watch closely, okay? This is actually based on some pretty significant psychology. It's leveraging pattern interruption to create curiosity based on the information gap theory. If you want to see what Carnegie Mellon has to say about it, well, you can read all that kind of stuff there. But basically, what it boils down to is they give you a little bit of information, but not all of it. And then you're curious. You want to see it. Now, I'm going to date myself here a little bit. When I was young, I used to have to, if I wanted an answer to something, get on this thing called a bus. And I had to write it to a place called a library, and I had to flip through these stupid little card things. And then if I was really lucky, it was on microfiche, because it was cool to watch it go wee, 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 right? But we had to work to get the answers to things. These days, we have this. Man, we are trained by these things. It's like Pavlov. It goes ding and we drool. We're like, oh, look, it's a text message, right? But we are used to getting information immediately on these things, and we're trained to do that. So what happens if we're denied that information? We suffer from FOMO, or the fear of missing out. We want to know what's going on. We don't want to be the person at the party that didn't get the joke because we didn't click on that ad, right? Now, these are very, very effective. Most of these are not bad necessarily, but they have been weaponized. Ad groups have been hit, they've been weaponized, they've been used to spread malware. Lots of things like that. But this is another psychological way of spinning that vulnerability in people, that we now need to know this information. I have this one up here just because I love it. 5 things you need to know about clickbait. Number 4 will blow your mind. Folks, it's a clickbait ad for a clickbait article. I picture like Inception, where the buildings are folding in on each other and the whole 9 yards, right? It's fantastic. Now, a lot of these ads, though, they will leverage outrage and anger. Those are the 2 strongest human emotions that will drive an action. If I can make you angry or I can outrage you, you will go take this action, because I pretty much wiped out your critical thinking, and then I put an action in front of you. For example, some of you may have noticed things are a little bit tense in the political spectrum here in the country lately, okay? So if I want to make you mad, I just figure out what side of the aisle you're on. I craft something, I send it to you or get it in front of you that says, this so-and-so did something extreme, go here and sign the petition. And if I can get you mad enough, you're not going to pay attention to the fact that the petition is asking for your name and your social security number and your first pet's name and your mom's maiden name and all those sorts of things, right? If I can get you upset enough, you're entering the information because you want to take action. It's an amazing thing how we react to that. Fear is one of those things that people are just as likely to back away from as they are to engage in. But outrage and anger are almost universally able to drive an action. Pretty scary stuff, really. So how do we defend ourselves against this fun? Well, a couple ways technically. We'll talk about these. First of all, email gateways. Yes, we need them. No, they won't save you. Email gateways are fantastic. The sheer volume of emails that goes out every day is mind-boggling. It's in the billions of phishing emails every day. So best of breed knocks out all but about 10 to 15% of them, which is admirable. It really is, because otherwise we would be doing nothing but dealing with those all stinking day long, right? The problem is this 10 to 15% that gets through there tend to be the better ones, right? It's knocking out all the Nigerian stuff. You'll never get your money now. The ones that get through tend to be the more targeted ones. They tend to be the good ones, and that's kind of a problem there, all right? But at least it's not the sheer volume. So again, that's one layer of things. SPF, DKIM, DMARC, if you run email servers, you should probably do something with one of these technologies. Frankly, you can bypass them, but it's another step. We did a thing a couple of years ago. We looked at email servers, and I think we found that 80% of the email servers that we looked at, and it wasn't a small number, have nothing set up to deal with spoofing. So SPF, Sender Policy Framework, this is a DNS record that basically says these are mail servers authorized to send from this domain. So if an email comes in from another domain pretending to be something, you can flag it, you can tag it, right? Again, there's ways around it, but DKIM also, same sort of thing, uses PKI and digital message signing. There's pros and cons. Some of them require you to get like the whole message body. Some of them can kill it right in the header. There's pros and cons for using both. And then DMARC basically says, what do you do with it? Do you flag it? Do you drop it? Most places that I've seen, the most they'll do is usually flag things that fail an SPF check or a DKIM check. Unfortunately, because everyone's so afraid of dumping the real messages that they tend to err on the side of caution. And I get that, If you're killing all of your customer emails, that's probably a bad thing. You might not be in business. You may be secure, but you won't be in business for long. Most secure business ever for about 2 days. But this is something that you should definitely look into. And what I like about this is some of these flags, if you flag them, you can use other tools to then flag the email and say, hey, something looks odd about this. What we're trying to do is we're trying to give people, the users, the recipients of these, some more tools to be able to spot these things and go, oh, okay. We want to try to give them as many tools as we can to identify these. So, multi-factor authentication. Roger, I don't want to hear a word from you on this slide. If you saw his how to hack MFA, yes, you can definitely hack a lot of MFA. But he said it too, and I agree with this 100%. Even SMS is better than nothing. It makes them work harder. And if it's you and having to deal with your SMS and trying to get that sort of stuff out of you, or somebody who doesn't, they're going to go to the person that's easier to do it. Okay, so multi-factor, two-factor is what I see the most. I've actually only personally used a true multi-factor, more than 2, less than 7 different factors. In the military, in one case, in some of the places that we went, we had to use our CAT card, we had to use our fingerprint, and we had to use a PIN. Okay? That was 3 distinct different factors, something you have, something you know, something you are. A lot of people get hung up on multi-factor with what the factors are. Again, a PIN and a password is the same thing you know. It's not something else, okay? But most two-factor is very helpful. If you have social media accounts, it's probably a good idea to enable those on those too, right? How many of you saw when the Tampa mayor got his Twitter account hit, right? That was embarrassing. There was some really, really rotten stuff going out over the top at like 2 o'clock in the morning. So, but had they not done something like that, it could have been pretty ugly for people. It could have been believable. Therefore, gosh, that was under the Obama administration. The Associated Press had their Twitter account taken over, and they posted something up about an explosion in the White House. And if you look at what happened to the stock market when that happened, it tanked for a few minutes because of that tweet. If your company has social media accounts, don't forget to apply stuff like this to those too. They're going to be trying to get information. They're going to try to get into whatever they can in phishing emails. And multi-factor helps with that, whether it's phishing emails, vishing emails, over the phone, whatever. End user training and reporting, yes. I know that's what we're about, but I'm here to tell you, in all of the years I've been doing this, the human factor in training humans has been one of the more volatile things that I've seen people with, where they believe that, oh, you can't train people, and I'm here to tell you you can. But it's the most powerful thing you can do when it comes to dealing with some of the biggest threats in your area. People underestimate what you can do with this. I'm a big fan of, if you're going to train them to spot them, also give them a way to report it. Now, we do have a free tool. It's called the Fish Alert button. You don't have to be a customer. You can use it. There's free tools out there to do this. Give them a way to report it to somebody so they're not having to deal with it all on their own. The idea is they spot something, they go, this is weird, and send it to someone else to look at it, okay? You pair the training then with ongoing simulated phishing emails. Big deal right there. Can't just train people once a year. So what you do is you train them, and then you do simulated phishing. What the simulated phishing does is not only does it make them paranoid, which is a good thing, you want to get them to a reasonable amount of paranoia, all right? They're always thinking, hey, is this one of the ones that those guys are sending out, you know, the IT department or whoever's doing it? You want them looking for that. But it also gives them a chance to practice what you've taught them in the training in a fail-safe environment. I would much rather have people practice on these than practice on real phishing emails, right? What's going to get you in your office over the weekend more than practicing on the real things? So there's a lot to be said for practicing in the simulated phishing stuff. It gets them used to that, it keeps it at the front of their mind, and it keeps them looking at it. Let's face it, 6 weeks from now, what are you going to remember from this training, right? Probably a whale jumping out of a picture. That's probably all you're going to walk away from this with. But I mean, honestly, if we don't continue thinking about these things, it all kind of goes away. It should avoid being overly technical. This is a key thing where I see people, especially technical people like me, mess this up bad. We do not need the people in marketing or accounting looking at email headers. If you're training them to do that, we're doing it wrong, folks. I'm sorry. You want them to spot the weirdness, and we all have that little spidey sense that something's off, right? We want them to take that and action on it in a safe way. We don't want them digging into the technical stuff. How many of you have ever had a user that did something dumb, and when you come up to them and you're like, why did you do that? They go, I don't know. You know, it felt kind of weird. Yeah, well, that's a result of not giving them an action to take that's a good action. Instead, we've all had that user that you're just like, wow, I can't believe you did that. And they go, yeah, me either. So here's another thing, though. Once they're proficient at spotting the attacks and they can report the attacks, a lot of people miss this part. This is a very valuable source of threat intelligence in your organization. You get people reporting things. I've seen people take SIMs, and if they get a certain amount of reports with the same subject line in, say, 30 minutes, they'll pop an alert. They'll pop a ticket on that, and people know they can go pull it off the mail servers so that the rest of the organization isn't being exposed to it. You know there's a campaign focused on your organization. That's actually threat intel. And it's good threat intel. It's telling you what's actually getting past all your filters probably too. Don't underestimate being able to use that kind of stuff. Your users can be a really good sensor on the far end of things. I see a lot of people just skip right past that. Now, when it comes to training, what you want to focus on is the emotions. Greed, curiosity, self-interest. There will always be urgency. If anyone's seen this, correct me, but I've never seen an email, a phishing email that says, yeah, and get around to it whenever you can. right? There's always something like, I need it now, we need it now, it's got to happen now. You'll be shut off, you'll be turned off, you'll be whatever. There's always, always, always a sense of urgency. So how do you combat this emotional warfare that they do? Well, honestly, it's easy enough that when you recognize that something gives you an emotional response, you take a deep breath and try to look at it logically, because that's what it's trying to do, is get you around your logical thinking piece. So you look at it logically, you're far more likely to see what's going on. Now, that doesn't mean everything that upsets you get an email is going to be a phishing email. It would be nice if that was that easy. But it does mean you need to take a little bit more attention, right? They work on helpfulness, self-interest. We've seen some very interesting scams where somebody gets an email, says, hey, little Johnny was on his way to school today. We picked him up. You'll never see little Johnny again unless you send us $1,000 in the next hour. And the parents are like, oh my God, worst fears. Or, I didn't like that kid anyways, I had a spare. You know, but I think it's more successful usually that they end up, you know, and they're like, if you contact anyone, little Johnny's gone. And so these parents will turn around and wire money off very, very quickly, and it's usually a low amount. That's something that they can pay immediately. In the meantime, little Johnny's fat, dumb, and happy at school eating pizza at lunch, right? But they've used open source intelligence to see where these people are. It's fear, it's terror on these people's behalf. So anytime they're spinning that stuff up, it can be amazing the things that can happen through that. So we try to focus on kind of 22 red flags when it comes to the end users. Things like, did I get an email at 2 o'clock in the morning from the HR department on a Saturday, and is that unusual? Maybe I should be careful with this thing, right? Did it make me upset? Does the reply to address not match? If I hover the link, does it say evil phishing domain, right? All of these things are real easy to spot, and then they go, man, if they're not positive and they're not willing to delete it, boom, report it. It's that easy. It really is. Now, we mess it up as technical people far too often, and this PDF is available on our website, by the way. Free download, whatever. People print it up, put it in cubes. But we as technical people try to train people on technical things, non-technical people on technical things, and we blow it. Let's be honest. It's something that we're never good at. We've gotten that reputation where people, you know, the Saturday Night Live skit where the IT guy comes in and just says, move. We have earned that reputation, folks. We're not always the most friendly people. If you're going to do training, I recommend, if you're going to do it in-house, work with your HR department, your marketing department, people that are actually trained to work with human behavior changes. It's nothing against us, it's how we're wired. Like, I've never seen anyone say, I'm only going to take this job if I can train end users. That doesn't happen, right? Okay, I wasn't going to take it till you threw that part in. All right, so we just need to understand how we're going to do this. Will it work? Yeah. This is like 9 million users in 18,000 organizations. We did a test, 30% average click rate, 15% 3 months later by training them, and then down to 2% at the end of a year. That's pretty phenomenal. These are the same people starting at 30% a year later at 2% click rates. And I'll be honest, with the way that we do our stuff, it's actually harder emails at that 2% click rate because we tell people you want to ramp them up as they get better. We can do this. People can be trained. We just have to know how to do it, and we have to apply it the right way. So the way we do it is actually very simple too. 4 steps. 4. That's 4. My fingers aren't all working right now. Baseline testing, you figure out where you are right then. Train the users. Then you do the phishing. So again, the phishing reinforces what you taught them in training. Watch the results. As they get better, make it harder. The other thing is, don't do training once a year and expect people to remember it all year. Break it up, a smaller, maybe a 30-minute training in the beginning, and do 5-minute stuff every quarter or every month even if you can. And then people will start to change that culture, and they'll start to understand a little bit more what they're doing. It keeps them fresh in their mind. So the way that we have to do this is different than we've done it in the past under compliance, which is once a year, check the box, yay! If you're going to do it to actually make a difference, you do need to do a couple steps, but this isn't complicated. This really is not complicated, folks, and it can make a big difference. So that's it for me. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. I appreciate everybody being here end of the day. Thank you.